nerds. This is Trip. And guess what? Today on Homebrewed Christianity is Kristian Smith. He is a graduate of McAfee School of Theology, an online influencer in the theological space. And here's what here's the real deal. He is a lover of theological conversations while smoking cigars, and so that's what we set up to do. And we did it live. Interacted with a number of members of his community, the Holy Smokes movement, and the Homebrewed community. If you hear this and go, whoa, it would have been fun. It would have been fun to hop on live. Then you probably should go check out the Homebrewed Christianity YouTube channel and hit the ringy bell thingy that'll tell you when it's going. Or consider joining the Homebrewed community, homebrewedcommunity.com. And sometimes we'll send you messages saying, like, here's some live streaming hangout opportunities. And then there's some that are special ones just for the members, like when Diana Butler Bass and I get together each month, talk about religion and politics in the public square, ruining dinner. That's what we call it. Anyway, go check it out. But before we hop in, I just want to tell everyone, I just got back from Denver. We were there for a God After Deconstruction event. I got to preach. We're part of a preaching event called Persuade, and spend some time checking out the location for Theology Beer Camp October 17th and 19th, right there in Denver, Colorado, and it is awesome. So if you want to come to Beer Camp this year, you want to nerd out with your geek out, you want to hang out with some amazing theologians. That's right, like Jorg Rieger, Ilya Dilio, Diana Butler Bass, Brian McLaren, John Tatamano, Gary Dorian. Come on. You want to come get some? Adam Clark is going to be there. Grace G. Sun Kim is going to be there. Leah Robinson's going to be there. Christy Whaley's going to be there. Thomas Jay Oord is going to be there. Yours truly, Trip, is going to be there. Come on. It's going to be a blast. It's going to be fun. TheologyBeer.camp. Get your ticket because, look. The venue is amazing. We have tons of stages, tons of awesome. And that's not even mentioning all the God pods that are going to be in the house. We haven't even started announcing the music. Come on. TheologyBeer.camp. Anyway, here we go. My live hang with Kristian.
Hello, everyone. This is Trip. And today, joining me on this live stream is Kristian Smith. He's a host at Holy Smokes, Cigar and Spirituality podcast. Also facilitates an online faith community that's been developing and growing, an influencer in the deconstruction space, but with a very different experience than those of us that come out of white Christianity in America. And that we ran into each other when I was doing a live podcast at his alma mater, McAfee School of Theology. And when he reached out, then I start seeing what he's doing on the internet. I'm like, whoa. So you're saying we could talk on the internet while we smoke cigars? And then we were. And then, I don't know if Satan did it, but the allergies attacked Kristian.
It was Satan. Satan.
I don't even give Satan credit for many things, but I really feel like the allergy attack, making it unable for, maybe it's setting up for temptation. You have an unlit cigar, and I will be smoking cigars, which will increase the likelihood that you get to talk more.
These are demonic forces are against me because I was in the ER yesterday morning with the asthma attack because Georgia pollen is the devil. Actually, I do believe like the devil and Georgia pollen go hand in hand, and I already have asthma, so there's that. What's up to my TFC Holy Smokes peeps? I see Jamie and Celeste are here with us. Always good to see my people. Trip, thanks for having me, man. Like I appreciate what you do, and you've been at it for a while. You the OG in this deconstruction podcast game.
Well, perseverance. You do it for 15 years, and then finally someone cares, and you're 16. Now, I think it might be a fun place to start, just so it's for you to share a bit about your story. Some people will be more familiar with it than others, but when like that whole process of both deciding to own your voice as a leader in the church, and then do it in more public ways where it's not just the people you interact with in your community where you're serving or where you experienced your call and all that kind of stuff. That's a series of saying yes. And if it doesn't take much scrolling through your Instagram comments to see what you've said yes to, may not always be affirmation of God's call on your life. So, like who is Kristian Smith to Kristian Smith, and where did that story begin?
Yeah, so I was raised National Baptist as far as my like theological background. So National Baptist is like the black version of Southern Baptist, basically. I'd say we're Southern Baptist light because we have all the same theology, basically, with the exception of like the overt racism and anti-blackness. But it's still there. There's still like a lot of covert anti-blackness. But I was raised in a space that was actually relatively progressive for its context. I'm a 5th generation Baptist preacher, which is wild every time I say it. My dad, my granddad, my great granddad, and his uncle were all Baptist preachers. These days, I think a lot of people wouldn't consider me Baptist anymore, even though the faith community is a church plant of Cooperative Baptist Fellowship. That's who.
And just to clarify, it's not a generic statement about a faith community. That's really the name of it.
Yes, that's the name of it, the faith community. Like when I went to seminary at McAfee School of Theology and went through a theological evolution and started thinking about what would a church look like if I started one, I was like, based on how my views and my theology has shifted so much, I just want the name of my ministry to be generic because I don't feel like it's something that I can really explain. You just have to kind of experience it and determine if it's for you. And I know it's not for everybody, but like I have tried so many times over the years to explain to people what the faith community is. And I just never adequately do it. So I just tell people, you know, it can't really be explained. It has to be experienced. So yeah, I started TFC and unofficially while I was in seminary. I had a class, you know, Frank Granger?
Yeah.
So I had a class with Frank Granger at McAfee, ministry with adults. I had to teach a Bible study for 5 to 8 weeks. That was the assignment. At the time, the church I was attending couldn't accommodate me because there was no Sunday school program. And Wednesday nights, I had a class at seminary, and that was the only opportunity to do it at the church. So I just called up some friends and family and said, hey, I got this assignment for seminary. Can y'all come to the apartment where my wife and I lived? And can y'all just be a part of this Bible study for me so I can do this project? And like 7 or 8 people said, yeah, we'll come. And we went through a study of the book of James for 6 weeks. And after the first session, my wife, Pamela, said, oh, yeah, you're not going to be able to stop this once this project is over. And I was like, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not doing this beyond this project. She said, OK, we'll see. And after the 6th session, I was telling everybody my thank yous and my goodbyes, and they stopped me midstream, like mid-sentence, like, oh, no, we're not ending this. We'll be back next Thursday. They said, what are we studying next week? I was like, oh, OK. And that went on for 3 years, 2015 to 2018, until, do you know Adam Gray?
Yeah.
Adam Gray, a good friend of mine. We went to seminary together at McAfee, and he knew what I was doing with the small group in my apartment. And if you know Adam, you know how he talks. He called me out to coffee. And, you know, just Adam and I would get coffee from time to time. We both lived in Atlanta, and we sat down to drink coffee. And I thought we were about to have a nice little friendly conversation. And he opened up the conversation with, Kristian, what the hell are you doing? I said, Adam, why are you talking to me like that? He said, what the hell are you doing? He said, you got a whole church meeting in your apartment every Thursday. and you won't do anything with it. What the hell are you doing? I said, Adam, I am not trying to start a church, dude. I'm not interested in doing that. I got this little clothing business I'm trying to build. Leave me alone. And he just chastised me for about 45 minutes and told me to just talk to the people in my group and see how they feel about it. So I talked to them individually, and the response I got from everybody was, we just been waiting on you. So we started the faith community.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, theoretically, that's about as Baptist as it gets, since the authority goes with the laity, and if the clergy wasn't even aware that's what they were doing till the laity told them, then
basically they told me, they were like, yeah, let's go ahead and do it, and we did it. And then the funny thing is, like, we started the faith community, but the theology is so disruptive that we were running into a challenge of finding our people when we made the ministry public. So the conversations that we were having at the faith community were, rich and disruptive and affirming, but the people that were called to, many of them don't want to do church. It's like one of the target groups that we have in our ministry is the over-churched. The people who are just over it. I'm tired of this shit. I don't want to do it anymore. Leave me alone. Right.
Where in a 6-month period, they went from volunteering twice a week, attending 2 other times, to nothing. Mm-hmm. From over churched in one sense to the over church in the other.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we figured, like, we need to repackage what we're doing so that people can at least be open to engaging it, to see if it works for them. So we started Holy Smoke, Cigars, and Spirituality in a collaboration with McAfee School of Theology. So we started meeting at Highland Cigar Company in Atlanta one Tuesday a month at 4 p.m. There's not really great parking at Highland. It's like a walking neighborhood. It was 4:00 on a Tuesday in Atlanta, so there was a lot of traffic. We were thinking nobody's gonna come, but even if it's just like a few of us from the school, we get to smoke cigars and have conversation. That'll be great. And before you knew it, like, we were taking up a whole side of the cigar lounge, and it turned into what it is now, with a digital podcast community.
That's really cool, and I wonder if there's a sense both in the in-person gathering and the podcast and the coming out of a chance for friends to get together and talk while you enjoy a cigar and stuff. If part of it isn't you're open and have certain kind of gifts of leadership, but you're aware of kind of a constellation of problems and pressures that are existing within the church, where there just wasn't an outlet or a place to connect and have relationships and such. And that, that's a natural minister gift, but usually we tend not to tend to the needs of the over church types, because usually getting over tithing is part of getting over the church.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's been a journey in of itself, right?
Yeah.
Because, like, money is one of those conversations that nobody likes to have. And that was really a big one for us, even in these past couple of years, just figuring out not only, like, how do we build digital community, but how do we sustain it? That's the challenge of this generation of digital ministers. We know how to make content, and we know how to, like, give people really good theological education and make sure they're entertained and empowered. But, like, how do you sustain it? That's a big one. And then coming from my context, like, dealing with over church people, the money part is the part that gets under a lot of people's skin. They have all types of trauma associated with it. So that's been one hell of a journey, and we're still on it.
Yeah. When I was in Los Angeles, I moved there for my PhD and was working at a church, and the leadership had a good idea. They were like, we want all of our clergy to do 10 hours a week doing something else in the community, and your passions to connect with people that would never walk in. And so I started doing the podcast at different breweries in LA, and it grew out where how many ever people could fit in whatever that brewery was, like 50 to 100 people, they'd all buy tickets and come. But these are almost all people who would never go to a church.
Yeah.
Now they did show up and have communal singing, probably a long conversation with some religious scholar and me, share beverages and community, and be sent out blessed to bless others. But it wasn't a church gathering because you just got a ticket and then you went there, and this kind of thing. And I think that that there is that big cultural shift. And as someone who is a fifth generation Baptist preacher, we don't have 5 in a row in my family, but we got plenty. The when you think of the faith you were handed, what were like the elements of it that you cherish deeply and hold closely, and what were the things you had to interrogate and wrestle with to get it home in this identity that 2 different communities are saying, no, Kristian, you got it. Like keep your Bible study project going. Let's be a church, and you got to get cornered by a friend. Or you start like, we'll get a few people together. And then there's this other thing. Like, can you describe like the blessings you inherited and wanted to preserve, and then the things that were the most difficult at picking up a big legacy like that to renegotiate and work through?
That's a great question. The way I draw a line of demarcation is the difference between my theology and my spirituality. That's the spirituality is the biggest cultural difference between the historically Black church and the historically white American church. Our spirituality is rooted in our African heritage. Like, it's always interesting to me to see tribal people in West Africa when they're in worship. It looks just like the Black church. It's like the same thing, just in a different context, because we carried that over with us in the Middle Passage. So I really, really cherish that. Even when I went to McAfee School of Theology, shout out McAfee, Mercer University, I went there intentionally because I wanted to be around people who didn't come from my tradition. I wanted to learn in community with people who had a different theological context, church context than I did. And when I got to McAfee, that's when I learned that the majority of my theology comes from white evangelical fundamentalism. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I began to really unpack the aspects of my theology that were, first of all, harmful to other people. Because I say frequently, in the Black Baptist church, I'm the epitome of privilege. Like, as a Black man in America, I'm one of the most hunted species in the country. But in the Black church, you don't get more privileged than a Black, cisgender, heterosexual male with charisma who can sing and preach. It just, everything is handed to me on a platter. So I didn't enter into this process out of some need to affirm myself. My church affirmed me in all the ways. Now, I really hated our sexual ethic, and I've done a lot of unpacking with that. But I really had a good experience in church. So when I went to seminary and started to evolve theologically and understood how much of my theology was based in keeping rules, I like, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And it really started with exploring human sexuality and how homophobic our theology is. And the tipping point for me was trying to figure out, what is this thing about sexual orientation? Because I was just raised in a space where, like, it's wrong. There was no conversation. It's like, you're not supposed to do that. And since that wasn't my orientation, it was easy to accept because it wasn't bashing me. And then I got around people who had a different theological view, and they challenged me and said, I want you to really sit with that. So I sat with it. And what the tipping point for me was, as I sat and reflected on my own sexuality, and I said, Kristian, did you choose to be straight? And I had to think about my own experience. And I was like, nah, I didn't choose to be straight. Like, I just like what I like. And I realized in that moment, sexual orientation is not a choice. It's a discovery. You discover what you are. And then you have to deal with the context in which you exist, where even though you discover what you are, you got the world telling you you can't be that. And once I realized that's what my theology was doing, I was like, I'm not practicing that anymore, but I want to hold on to that spirituality because those two are not the same. So how do I create a space that has the spirituality that raised me where I can rethink the theology that raised me? And that's how we got to this point.
No, that's really helpful. And I think that contrast between spirituality and theology is a real fruitful contrast. One of my friends, Grace Ji-sun Kim, a feminist Korean theologian, has a new book coming out that I've been reading it because it comes out in a month or so, called "When God Became White," and in it she has a similar story, right, of discovering the legacy, rhythm, practices, spiritual orientation of her Korean heritage, and then discovering that so much of the Christianity she was handed was like a white god in Korean cosplay, and somehow like normative theology is the Anglo-European deity that was also the one that sanctioned, right, colonialism, missiology as cultural imperialism, and these kinds of things. And there's this, I think we're at a moment in church history where there's a growing awareness of that, which both allows the diversity of the church to reclaim in new ways, and even just name out loud what's being preserved in these different spiritual traditions, and reveal as a contextual theology what really revealing what was normative theology is really a contextual theology. It's the European Anglo God.
Yeah.
And setting that aside, I think opens up the church to like rediscovering wisdom that existed when what wasn't normative was a vision of the divine that cooperates with the ugliest expressions of power, from really like the rise of the rise of the church and state conundrum in the 4th century and on.
One of the people that we both admire greatly, John Dominic Crossan, just a brilliant mind. And I've listened to him on your show a couple of times, and I listened to him with Tim over at the New Evangelicals. And one of the things he said that was so profound to me was in his exploration of the early church, particularly when Constantine came into power. Like pre-Constantine, the early Christian church in the Roman Empire was persecuted. And it appeared that they were being persecuted by paganism. They thought paganism was the problem. Like, if these pagans would leave us alone, we'd be all right. But then Constantine comes into power, and then Constantine centers the Christian church. And then the Christian church gets in bed with the empire and starts to persecute pagans. So the pagans were never the problem. The problem was empire. And whatever faith tradition aligns itself with the empire, whatever faith tradition gets in bed with power, that's the problem. So Christianity can be a beautiful thing when practiced within its original intent, but when it gets in bed with empire, everything goes wrong. Everything goes wrong.
Yeah. When you think of that kind of discovery and those tensions and that are there, how does that shape the way kind of faith, like reworking faith, the kind of challenges that show up, like what deconstruction looks like? How is it different when there is this inherited, vibrant spiritual tradition that has been present right within the Black church, as opposed to I think when you look at a lot of those deconstructing out of a white part of the church, the spirituality is the spirituality. It's slaveholder spirituality, and you might have a new question, but you sing the same hymns that your grandfather and great grandfather sing.
Yeah, it's our cultural spirituality is embodied. It is very much an embodied. It's a static expression. So what I have observed is that, generally speaking, the white people I do ministry with, they generally hold a lot of their like spirituality here. It's what they know. And generally for us, it's what we feel in our bodies. So we take that culture with us everywhere. There are a whole lot of the people who are in the comments right now. Shout out to everybody. Brittany, everybody. Reverend Jackson, Sharice, it's good to see all of y'all. Latrice, we take that with us. So a lot of church kids who are no longer in church, they'll just go create church somewhere else. They'll go to a concert and do church there. They'll go to a podcast recording and do church there. One of the very popular figures in like black comedy and the black churches, a guy named Kev on Stage. And Kev on Stage is a comedian who comes out of the church, and initially the majority of his audience was black church people, and still a significant portion of his audience is black church people. When he goes on tour to do podcast recordings, they have church. The spirituality is there. We've had conversations in our community where there have been white people present, because TFC is like culturally black, but everybody's welcome. Like the white people who are a part of our community, they know they are loved, they are accepted, they are affirmed. They also know that their experience as a white person is not centered in this space. And we've had conversations where the black people will be talking about stuff that we feel. And I remember one conversation in particular, there was a white person there, and she said, I'm listening to you all talk, and I just can't relate. I've never had that feeling in all of my years in church. I've never had the feeling that you all discuss and describe. And it was just kind of unsettling for her. But then we had another white member of our community who saw how we were really leaning into the African spirituality that really grounds our faith expression. And it made her get interested in her cultural heritage. Like, where do I come from spiritually? And she traced it back to the Celtic tradition. And when she traced it back to the Celtic tradition and got outside of this scope of whiteness and really got into the cultural expression of the Celtics, it resonated with her in a different way. It's like, oh, this feels like home. It's like, yeah. If we could get from under the oppressive hand of whiteness, all of us would be better. Not just people of color. White people would do better if we would get from under the grip of whiteness as a whole.
Yeah, I think that there's a like when religious expression when the expectations for religious expression is requiring sameness, then you have to ask who's same, like what's the normative expression. So I mean, even within like the earliest feminist movement in white theology, right, where women going like, well, I'm pretty sure what's normative is actually like the extroverted white dude. Mm-hmm. And then the other things are minimized. And then the same thing you could see right within like the multiple generations in black theology and the emergence of the womanist tradition, where you in each of the different times in the last 100 years, you get movements within the church that some people, if what's normative is the only gatekeeping boundary expression of Christianity, then any of these critiques are like attacks. Mm-hmm. And there's a different disposition that I hear people recognizing in you, which is how you get the trust to facilitate in these spaces, is that these different expressions, it's rediscovering assets and resources of the spirit that we could be inheriting, that a very monologic, a very desire for sameness has been cutting us off from. both like within the Black church, the spiritual tradition, but also the example of members in your community rediscovering Celtic spirituality that wasn't allowed. And, and we can go through, there's list upon list of it. And it's kind of like, I think we're at a point where more people in the church are rediscovering just how radical the gift of Pentecost was.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I mean, Pentecostalism is the fastest growing Christian tradition in the world right now because it's highly experiential. So a major segment of my ministry, the faith community, is ex-Pentecostals. And I shouldn't even say ex-Pentecostals. They are Pentecostal. They just evolved past the theology. The theology just did not work for them anymore, but they churchy as hell. Like if you,
my friend Mike Morrell, who's come out of the Pentecostal tradition, calls it expansive Pentecostalism because sometimes the spirit runs outside the building.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I met Bishop Carlton Pearson about a year ago, March of last year. And it was an instant connection. He passed away in November, but the time that we had together was so beautiful. And he was the darling of the Pentecostal movement at the peak of his ministry. And he, through his theological evolution, began to develop this concept of metacostal. So it's this metaphysical view of the world with a Pentecostal flair. And I think a lot of the people in the Holy Smokes and the faith community are metacostal and understanding that, what you put out into the world is what comes back to you, law of attraction, vibrations. And I believe that stuff aligns with the ministry of Jesus. So like, we don't try to lift up one over the other. It's like, what resonates with you? Like I am speaking from the perspective of someone who came to my conclusions through an encounter with the story of Jesus. But if you come at it from a different perspective and we land at the same place, right? Love God, love your neighbor, love yourself. If we can land there, then I really don't care how you got there. I just want us to do right by ourselves and do right by each other. And then we can figure out all the other stuff together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's a, this may just be a nerdy aside and you're like, Trip, that's interesting. But when you look even at the way the theological debates got framed as the early church came to become the steward of empire in the West, that the Western notion of the Trinity, adds the filioque clause, right? Like the Spirit comes from the Father, the Son, and then you get the Spirit. Like in the moment, the Spirit only shows up if the Son's present. Then the activity of the Spirit is something the church has a monopoly over. Absolutely. But in the East, and I think in Paul and obviously in the practice of Jesus, since he was sending people out before he even was crucified, empowering them to go do it. If people came up to him and they're like, look, they're casting out demons, they didn't even use your name. And he's like, don't you know what my agenda is? Why are you going to stop people if they're doing the Spirit's business? In the East, you got the event of God in Christ is normative for the character and the revelation of what the Spirit's up to, but the Spirit's everywhere. It's always a present possibility, and what it's looking for people to say yes to make the desires, dream, lure, call of God actual, to make it material, or you could say come on earth as it is in heaven. And I think that part of moving beyond, right, like especially when the Father and the Son have been interpreted and handed down by an imperially compliant church, then the Spirit needs to be something you control. Yes. To keep the logic there. Yes. But if the Spirit is as free as Jesus and his mommy said so, then it's above the church pay grade to tell her where she can go.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I could not agree with you more. And I'm a theology nerd too, so you can always nerd out with me. I'm gonna tell you a funny story before I talk about the Spirit.
I support funny stories.
So on the Holy Smokes Cigars and Spirituality podcast, we have this mechanism called the dollar jar, because we use, when you get into theologically academic settings, you just start throwing words around that we understand and not everybody else does because they didn't sit in all of these classes. And
they managed to avoid student loans in order to, and still can talk about God. It's quite wild.
I know, right? That's crazy. So whenever we say an academic term, if the person on the show doesn't define it, we hit them with the dollar jar. They got to put $1 in the jar. So when I told my community that I was going live with Trip Fuller, some people listen to your podcast, and one of the members said in the comments, "Oh, there's going to be a lot of dollar jar words on this show. I can't even keep up with Trip."
Well, someone have to keep track, and then I'll have to pay my dues, and I'll mail you more cigars as a sign of repentance. So if the Satan hadn't you had your allergies act up, I sent Kristian some high quality cigars for this. So I really think in order to really stick it to Satan, we'll just have to do it again. When the allergies aren't trying to take you down.
Absolutely.
And but there was something else you were going. That was the story aside before you were going.
Yeah.
But we'll see how my dollar jar goes. If at the end I haven't done enough, I'll just start saying random words. So I have to mail you some cigars.
We'll take it. I think my appreciation for spirit has been one of the most valuable outgrowths of my deconstruction journey. I didn't have this kind of appreciation for spirit when I was practicing rule keeping theology. But now my appreciation of the spirit has convinced me that God is in my gut, that God flows through my intuition, and that can't be contained by a tradition. That can't be contained by somebody's doctrine. That can't be contained by a political system. And it has been such a rich experience to be able to embrace spirit and sense the power of it, and then to appreciate the feminine identity of spirit and the divinity and femininity. And it has helped me to even embrace those aspects of myself that a patriarchal society said I couldn't. So I backed into certain expressions of liberation for myself by advocating for other people. I was like, oh man, patriarchy, it's terrible. It's damaging to women. We got to stop this. It's damaging to queer people. We got to stop this. And the more I kept doing the work, I was like, oh, this is damaging to me too. And it has been such a liberating experience for myself.
Yeah. No, I love the image of the gut, right? Like both as a metaphor, but the more we know actually about the human being is your gut. You're carrying around billions of other creatures, and we don't exist without all this going on in our gut. But the notion of the self in modernity, especially one that a culture that would like to control us gives us, is that you're an autonomous subject, and that now you're the locus of what we're going to control. And what an accurate depiction of a human being is that you're actually a community of living things, and as you sustain one and each other, then that's what sustains your life. Both like within you, there's billions of other creatures that are required for us just to digest food. And then the boundaries of a self aren't even accurate. Like the moment you start to think about life in the spirit, right? Like that you realize that in places that you are operating, informed and shaped by patriarchal power, that you're actually cutting yourself off from flourishing in parts of your own identity, personality, and experiences. And now you're like contributing to limits, and you're harming other people. And it's surprising that people made in the image of God, mutual flourishing is good for everyone. But if we continue to believe that you're an autonomous subject with some strict boundary around you, then I think we end up missing the invitation that we are one to another. You might even think that we're members of the same body. And there are all these images, right, running through Scripture. Like we're all baptized into the same body. Like Paul runs around talking about in Christ, we share the mind of Christ, all these kinds of images. And yet somehow over the course of the last 500 years, all of them, those got turned into metaphors, because what we really need are these individual subjects so we can tell them who they really are. And if they want to have access to the truth, they have to come to us. And part of the liberating movements within the church are opening up the places, all those ideas, even from people that are inheriting privilege, are cutting themselves off from flourishing, and that you're becoming instruments to cut other people off from it.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I grew up in a space where I got bullied a lot as a kid. I dealt with a lot of verbal bullying because I was a fat kid, and it made me hate bullies. Like I would advocate for other kids when bullies were messing with them, because I was a fat kid, but I was also big and I was athletic and I was a little bit stronger than the average kid. So I really hated bullies. And what happened is I realized early on in my theological evolution that my embedded theology was bullying people. And I was like, oh, I can't be the bully. No. Like, so we're gonna have to figure out how to work around this. So then I became an advocate for others and discovered I was advocating for myself too. I just didn't know it at the time, because I didn't know how my theology was keeping me from the full expression of divinity within me. And I still haven't discovered that. Like, I don't think I'll ever fully discover the fullness and the expansion of divinity within me. But I mean, I'm loving the journey. And that's why nobody can talk me off of my stance, because the quality of my life has gotten so much better. Right. So I don't care what people say in my comments on social media, like, because I'm living this life and I know how much better my life has become by going down this path. The people with whom I'm in community, when they tell me how much better their life has become by going down this path, it's like, that's all of the affirmation that I need, because our lives are getting better without hurting anybody else. We're not telling anybody else who they can be or who they can't be. We're just making the decision for ourselves. This is who we are. We're making a commitment to loving our neighbors as ourselves, which, in my opinion, when we talk about Christ, I believe that's Christ consciousness. And for too long in our churches, we've been taught faith in Jesus without being taught the faith of Jesus. And I believe Christ consciousness is rooted in knowing and loving yourself. And then you can project that onto the people around you. But we're taught that self-love is a negative, that is bad, that you shouldn't do it. And how are you going to love other people when you don't love yourself? So if we're not taught to love ourselves, and we're taught that we got to be subject to all of these mechanisms of control, when we're told to love other people, our love for other people looks like control. So that's why people don't want to deal with Christians all the time, because we think loving people is controlling them, because that's how we treat ourselves. And it's just a recipe for disaster, which is why I cannot do it anymore. Like, if I can't do ministry like this, I just won't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that contrast, right, of discovery, like discovery is a process and it's something you're either doing or not doing, but discovery is not a destination. And I think that a lot of times, if depictions of the spiritual life, if we're all trying to get people to go to the place we want them to be, then you're doing it right if you get to our destination that we prescribe. And then, like, different parts of the church have a different definition, and then you're battling over whose definition's, the correct one, as opposed to realizing that the diversity of human beings all collectively bear the image of God in all sorts of different ways. And if we aren't even transparent and aware of who we are, and it takes a lifetime to figure out some of it before a loving God, then, like, what exactly are we doing if we're getting prescriptive and telling everyone else the destination of their journey is going to be? And it just happens to be probably a place where, they're tithing to the church that we're rocking the pulpit, pretending that bullying is a proclamation of the gospel.
Exactly. And we accept the world that we are presented, generally speaking. That's why it makes sense to so many people to exert control over others, because that's the world that was presented to us. I was sharing with my community the other day. I watched the Truman Show with my wife last week, which I don't remember what year that came out, but it's Jim Carrey. His whole life was a live stream because he was an orphan and this media company adopted him and created this huge sound stage that was his world. He was born in this, or he was like, as an infant, he was put in this sound stage, and that is the world that he experienced for 30 plus years of life. And in the movie, a news reporter was talking to the director of the Truman Show and was asking him, like, why do you think he hasn't, pushed back or anything? And the director said, well, people generally accept the world that is presented to them. So if that's all and you don't think to question it, you just go along with it. And for so long, so many of us just went along with it because that's all we knew. And this, the age of information really accelerated people asking questions. And then I believe, we moved into the age of authenticity because everybody has access to information. So now people are interested in who can authentically communicate that information in a way that people can understand and digest. And the pandemic accelerated that even more. The age of Trump accelerated that even more. Like, there's so many things that have all come together in this particular time period that have really set this whole movement of deconstruction in motion in ways that, like, I'm not even sure the world is ready.
Yeah. And I think one of the difficult parts, as people kind of become aware that, right, like, no one picked where they were born in the world. You show up there, and as you learn to talk, the world isn't like some objective thing. It comes interpreted through all the language systems, patterns, and such that are there. John Paul Sartre has this line that everybody's always already embarked. You don't start from like a real place where it's like, value neutral and you build up something. You internalize everything around you. And so there comes this tension with, what do you do with the tradition in which you found yourself? And and sometimes the tradition is so harmful, it represses questions and insists you call harm good and all these kinds of things. Then what do you do with it? And one of the things that I really resonate with the way you're describing is, like, what happens if the tradition is the thing you're inheriting that then you get to think with and about, but it's alive, right? Like, it's going to be embodied again in our kids and then in our grandkids. So, like, part of the task is, both of us Baptist preachers' kids, you were gifted something, you inherited something, but so, like, what parts of it are so beautiful you can't help but want to embody it and share it? And then what were the parts that actually keep you from flourishing, your neighbor and even your enemy? And what do you do with them? And to me, like, I remember my first kind of like big breakup and questioning point of the faith I was handed was, I was in college at 9/11 at a Baptist college in North Carolina. And when, after 9/11, when the prayer circle after mandatory chapel, just how Jesus asked us to do it, sounded like a bunch of nationalist militarism packed full of Islamophobia and not praying for your enemies, the thing we were commanded to do. And if we listen to our Lord, you go, oh, this is uncomfortable. And then when the first bombs start getting dropped and everyone's watching on CNN and clapping erupts in the Christian dorm, I go, where'd this plot come from? What's going on? And I think since 2016, you're right, and then in lockdown, more and more people are going, look, I'm not saying I haven't encountered the love of God in Christ and what I was handed, but don't you think our picture of God might, I don't know, at least be as nice as Jesus?
You would think.
I feel like that's kind of like Christianity 101. But so often, right, if you need control, if you need certainty, if you need finality, if you need clear in and out boundaries so you know who you're defining yourself against, then what Jesus said, did, endured, becomes utterly problematic for the religion that bears his name.
Yeah. And when you practice a religion that is aligned with the empire, then you shape your doctrine to whatever benefits the empire. So if the empire says these are our enemies that need to be destroyed, well, then hell, we'll find every Bible verse that we can find to justify destroying those enemies. And for those of us who know the Bible, that's not very difficult. You can find it all over the Bible.
Oh, you can find, there's a lot to work with.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's not difficult. That's why I tell people I'm very careful about using the term biblical, because in my faith tradition, the term biblical was a metric of morality. Like, oh, that's not biblical. Like, what does that even mean? Like,
well,
biblical?
It's like in Jesus said not to wear yoga pants.
Right. Yeah. Women can't wear pants and men shouldn't wear hats in buildings. It's like, you know, these cultural rules that we've come up with, and then we've ascribed them to the Bible. It's wild. And I'm going to tell you something that has been really interesting for me to see during this period of theological evolution and deconstruction. Because, you know, we started the faith community 5.5 years ago, but people really started discovering it probably about a year and a half ago when I got on TikTok. And that's when it started to really gain some traction. And I feel like I'm the keeper of stories. A lot of people tell me their stories, and I'm so appreciative for that, because it helps me to see patterns and trends and see shared experiences that people have. So what's been really interesting for me, because the faith community is LGBTQ plus affirming, and that's very uncommon in a Black church space. It's uncommon to find like genuinely LGBTQ plus affirming spaces where everybody is affirmed in all of their humanity. They're in leadership. They're in whatever aspect of the community that suits them. And I've been talking to a lot of people over the years, and what I found out, a lot of Black people, particularly Black queer people, became disenchanted with the Black church because of how it oppressed their sexual and gender identity. And they made their way to the white churches that were affirming because they're easier to find. And then they will find their way into these white churches where they were affirmed in their sexuality. And the fact that their race wasn't really affirmed wasn't a big deal, because, you know, everything was like relatively peaceful. And then Trump came into power. And then they realized, oh, I'm not safe here as a Black person. So I've encountered a whole lot of Black people who've entered our space who were in a wilderness because they were too queer for the Black church and too Black for the white church and had nowhere to land. And that's such an interesting phenomenon to me. That's why, like, you know, when we talk about this era in the faith, Christendom, however we look back at it, I think it's going to be difficult to talk about this time without talking about the Trump era, because it had a major impact on how churches and people of faith started to reorient themselves.
Oh, yeah. And you know, before we got on, I mentioned that the last 3 years until this past year, I was in Scotland, and then before that, 10 years in LA. Coming back to the South, if you're out of it and then you jump back in, you realize, you know those like above ground kiddie pools that are like 3.5 feet.
Yeah.
And when we had them, you know, everybody would get in and you start running the same way, so you get a nice little whirlpool going, and you know you're going fine as long as everyone's going the same direction. And you don't really notice it. It's like everyone's contributing a little bit, and it's like lazy river because it's hot and humid in the South. But if you can't cooperate with the flow, if there's some part of it that you try to resist, all of a sudden the inertia and the force is the only thing you notice. And then you start bumping into people. There's conflict that's had, and if you aren't going with the flow, you might get pulled under if you don't have, you know, your feet planted in there. And to me, that's been very similar to the experience coming back here, where you go, whoa, is this what we're doing? Are we or have we thought about this? But if that's been your context, you may not have noticed that everyone started walking faster, and that the pool got even harder, and so like when you said, too queer for the black church and too black for the white church with no place to land, that resonated with me, and for a very different reason. But just coming back and going,
yeah,
well, you taught me Sunday school. Why do you have that in your front yard? Like, so yeah, I think you're right that the cultural impact of this moment, it in all likelihood, it will take space before we realize how much it ended up reshaping everything.
I agree. I think we're in the middle of a reformation. We look back at Christendom every 500 years. There's some type of significant shift, and the last one was 500 years ago.
Yeah,
so I think we're in the middle of one.
So, tell me, what have you learned starting something online, going into COVID and out? Like, as more people learned how to use Zoom and all these kinds of things. I know, like in homebrew, we had been doing online classes, like 4 to 6 week things, like the one with Crossing and stuff. And then in lockdown, like there's a whole chunk of people that finally learned how to use the internet. And we normally have 500 to 1,000, and all of a sudden there's 2,000 to 4,000 people in these classes. And also they start raising the questions of the stuff that, inspired you when you're in div school, and me as well. You're like, oh, so Christianity doesn't have to suck on these issues. There's actually like whole other expressions. There are things we can learn and grow from. How is that? Like, what have you learned about leading and making space for people in a digital gathering that is different than like the congregational space that generations in your family have inherited?
So the question is, like, how do I narrow this down? Because this has been the last 4 years of my life, just trying to figure this out. Because when the pandemic started, the faith community was 18 months old. I was in a doctoral program that I stopped when the pandemic started because I made money as a clothing professional. And when the pandemic started, nobody was buying custom clothes anymore. Because for what? We're all at the house. So
you didn't start doing just sweatsuits?
I'm doing sweatsuits now.
Yeah.
I have
just selling tops, no bottoms needed.
Right. So I started this process of just trying to figure out, what does it look like to be a virtual community of faith? Because prior to that, we were hybrid. I was still really focusing on building out a ministry in Atlanta that had an online presence. But going into the pandemic, it was like, okay, this isn't an Atlanta ministry anymore. Like, we're for whoever joins us in the virtual space. And what does that look like? And two things I discovered. The work of the church, I think, primarily is to build community. And I think that gets lost in the conversation with digital ministry, because so many churches believe that I just got to have a really good stream. Like, if my Sunday morning stream is good, I'm doing the work. And if we got a lot of viewers and followers, then that's how we measure success. And that doesn't build community. Like, that's not what brings people together. But that's the work of the church. We love to quote in the Black church. I'm not sure if y'all do this a lot in predominantly white spaces, but we will drag forsake not the assembling of yourselves into any conversation to try to make people feel pressured into coming to church on Sunday.
Yeah.
But I believe that is to stress the importance of community, not Sunday morning service. So we put a lot of energy into digital community building. How do we connect people together in a space where we can encourage, affirm, empower, educate each other, support each other, get to know each other, because we build relationships. I pastor a bunch of people I've never met in person before, but we have real relationships. Like, we know each other by name. And when I do see them in person, it's not going to be like, I never met you before. It's going to be like, oh, hey, what's up? Good to like see you in the flesh. So that's been a really big part, just building digital community, learning how to do that effectively and learning how to get other people involved in that process, because that was a big thing. Like, we were building it out and we had all of these people who were connecting with it, but it was like, okay, so how do I get digital ministers involved in the work of a digital church? What does that look like? So we've built out structure so that people who have a passion for ministry can live that out in the digital space. So I got a team of digital ministers from Birmingham to Michigan to South Carolina to New York to California, Georgia, Michigan, like Illinois, like all over the place, because we had to figure out, what does it look like to give people a place to live out their call without having to be in a physical building. And then the other really big piece that I had to work through was, how do you make it sustainable? Because we are conditioned to think everything on the internet is supposed to be free. And then we already have issues with money in church. So like, if I didn't brand myself as a pastor, right? Like, it would be, if I just like kind of put myself out there as an educator and said I was going to be doing classes and you could sign up for them, I don't think people would have had nearly as big of a challenge with paying for the classes. But when it was like a church, it was like I remember one of the funniest things ever when I was doing, like, helping people understand that this digital community is a church. Like, we just do church differently. And I'm sorry that you told yourself you were never going to engage a church again, but we do church differently. And you're at a church, whether you want to call it that or not. I created this shit. It's a church, And one day, one of the members of the community who has sworn off church, she said in one of the chats, she was like, I guess I'm a part of this church. It feels so weird to say that. But it's like, we created a space where people could feel seen and welcome and heard. We just call it church. And people had never felt seen and welcome and heard in church. So they didn't think they could experience that. So helping people to understand all of those different dynamics has been a significant lift. I'm just glad.
I bet. So like what did you have to figure out, right? So if you're planning a church and it's in person, there are all the expectations of the ways you connect, be it like worship, and then you got your volunteer stuff that is more for outreach, and then you got like the infrastructure of the physical building, and you got small groups and children's and youth things, and you got like there's here's the group that does the music stuff, and like here's how you have responsibility with the elders, deacons, etc. Like when you're in an online space, like what are, like, if someone became involved now, like what would they discover you had to invent and figure out and like and negotiate and learn how to do it well, right, in an online way?
Yeah. So the digital community building part is the biggest part. I liken the faith community to the temple in Acts, where you have the inner courts and the Holy of Holies, where like you go for worship. It's vertical, what churches do on Sunday mornings. So you got the inner courts, the Holy of Holies, but then you have the outer courts of the temple in Acts, where people just go every day just to be in fellowship with each other. That is the majority of what we do at the faith community. We have church 24/7 because we're in there engaging, sharing ideas, cracking jokes, crying with each other, laughing with each other, praying for each other. And facilitating that kind of space is a skill set that has to be learned. So I have a team of about 20 to 25 digital community builders, and we do that together to like create organic engagement by starting conversations and getting people to reflect on certain topics. And then in my context, it was really different because, like I said, a lot of the people that I'm called to didn't want to do church. So we built our ministry around a podcast. So for them, it was like, ooh, I love this podcast. And then, ooh, I'm going to join this digital community because I love this podcast and I want to get access to more of the stuff this podcast is doing. And then they got in there and it was like, now, y'all know this podcast is the ministry of this church, right? Like you joined a ministry of the faith community. So when people join, they just have to take some time to explore because it's such a novel concept. People join, they see the exclusive content, and then they take a step further, and then they see the connection groups that we have. So we have a group that called Let's Talk About Sex, where we just explore disruptive sexual ethics. We have a group called the Disruptive Readers Club, where it's a book club and read books and discuss them together. We have a group called Black Women and African Spirituality, which is the most popular episode topic we've ever done on Holy Smokes. I think our next installment of Black Women and African Spirituality will be like the 7th episode with just that topic. And there's a whole community within our community of Black women who get together and explore African spirituality together. We have a group called Emerging Generations, which right now is for people who are deconstructing and trying to figure out, how do I have this conversation with my kids? And we explore those conversations in there. So that's how people kind of get connected in community and kind of get into that flow of what it means to be a part of it. And then we have classes. So we have a gathering called The Bible and Beyond, which is like our version of Bible study, but we're exploring what we hear from the divine in the Bible and beyond. So we have other sacred texts that we also consult, or one of which is Black Liturgies by Cole Arthur Riley, one of the most powerful books I've encountered in a long while. I consider Black Liturgies to be sacred text. So we've built out like an ecosystem. It's like a whole world. Once you join the Patreon community, it's like you could get lost in there.
So when you look back at the origin of the podcast starts first in the cigar shop. Is that how it started? The Holy Smokes group gathering once a month, and then it kind of builds out. One of the elements of a cigar shop is once you're sitting in a circle and you light a cigar, it's amazing how much difference doesn't seem offensive anymore because you have something in common, and like you're going to listen because you don't want your cigar to go out, and then it makes for a different kind of rhythm, right? Than if you're just sitting there and there's a Bible in front of you and some boundaries to patrol.
Right.
But for people maybe that haven't, aren't the kind that hang out in a cigar shop, take us back to the early days and what was the experience and thing that got facilitated there that you weren't anticipating, that you thought a podcast coming out of this can be an integral part of figuring out how to have a community with all these different ways of connecting and participating and learning together?
So the reason Holy Smokes became a podcast is because we had people who would come visit the gathering in the cigar lounge on I forget which, the second Tuesday of each month at 4:00, and repeatedly new people would come and say, y'all got to put this on the internet. Y'all got to put these conversations on the internet. And I was like, yeah, but like a lot of people that come here appreciate the anonymity, because the conversations that we're having are taboo. You're not supposed to have these conversations in a spiritual setting. So we have a lot of people who come every month and don't want their primary church to know that they're here. So I can't put a camera in their face, or put a mic in front of them and say, hey, we're going to put this on the World Wide Web. So instead of trying to turn that gathering into something we put on the internet, I just selected a few people who were there who I knew would be comfortable doing this on a public platform. And we built the podcast around that. Now, initially, it was supposed to, we're still going to like record the podcast at the Cigar Lounge. But the pandemic started the week after we recorded our first episode. The shutdown happened. So at that moment, everything went digital and we just started recording remotely like what you and I are doing here. And that has been the life of the ministry ever since. So that's how it kind of transformed from this in-person gathering to this digital gathering. And then we've just been building it out like with baby steps. All right, so what's the next step? How do we expand this? How do we add on to this to where it's become, I'm grateful to say a thriving digital community. I really love my community. I'm glad to be doing this with these people.
Yeah. What's the URL that you'd send people to where they would be able to connect with the online space, not just obviously the podcast will be available wherever podcasts are, but
right. Yeah. So holysmokesmovement.com is the URL for people who engage us via the Holy Smokes content that we do. And then depending on how people encounter us, they can also go to the faithcommunity.org. Because like Holy Smokes is a ministry of the faith community, but Holy Smokes has a personality all of its own. So whether you go to holysmokesmovement.com or the faithcommunity.org, it's going to take you to the same digital community. So you can connect with us there and just explore. It's like I said, it's one of those spaces that you have to experience. It cannot be explained. Because again, I founded this thing and I can't explain it. I try all the time and I can't. And I ask people like, how would y'all explain this? And it's very difficult to explain.
Yeah, no, I understand it just in trying to explain homebrewed Christianity. It's been going 16 years and you're like, well, you know, it started because of my theology pub group at the church I was working at. No one read the books before it except me. So then I spent half the time explaining the book, which if you're doing something at a brewery and you have to explain it, that means everyone else has finished their first pint before you've started. And so I started just interviewing the author, sending it on rewritable discs, you know, because this was before I knew what a podcast was.
Right.
And then people were like, oh, well, can I get these interviews to use at my church when we start one? And then I found out about podcasts and, you know, it kind of moved on. And then like over time, you have to keep like discovering ways of serving the community that's there and facilitating the best parts. And then it kind of grows. And then people ask you what it is. And you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, you know, so there's like the 65,000 people that are just in the email list and then they find out about stuff, but then some of them only listen to the podcast and then occasionally they join a class, and there are people who don't like podcasts, but they do all the class things and they're always on live. And then the other people are like, I want to wait till the class is done, binge it, and then send in questions for you to answer later. And you're like, at first, I don't know if you had this experience where if you're used to in a congregation context, you're just uncomfortable because you're like, this isn't how we do it. And what's funny, like if you're a Baptist preacher's kid inheriting it and you think you're just being a little creative, and then the people that start engaging it are telling you like, no, you should be more creative. Also, I'm connecting with this community in ways I didn't connect with the others. Can I have some more, please? Mm-hmm. And you're like, yeah, I guess, you know, and you know, over time you have to like invent it. Sometimes I've tried weird things that I thought were great ideas and they were like, don't do that again. And other times stuff you didn't think would work. And if you don't do it, they get upset. And you're like, oh.
I'm going to tell you something that tripped me out in my community. So earlier this month, I was doing a live stream. It wasn't a stream. We were actually on a Google Meet. and we were talking about some things that were going on in the ministry. And I was sharing with everybody the April calendar because we have a really, really busy month, right? So I was like, look, this is all the stuff that we got going on. All of these gatherings are virtual. So like, we're not saying you got to come to all of this stuff. We don't expect anybody to come to all of this stuff, but it's like a menu of stuff that you can pick from. Because in a month with 30 days, we had some type of programming scheduled 22 of the 30 days. So we were having that conversation and somebody said, is there any way we can get this in like a RSS feed or a Google calendar so we can just add all the stuff to our calendar? And I was like, y'all want to put all of this stuff on your calendar? And
you're like, I don't know if I'm going to have it all on mine. And I started it.
Right. I was like, y'all want this on y'all calendar? And then like, you know, the person that initiated it said, yeah, I'd love to put it on my calendar. And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, I guess if that's what people want, do y'all want that? And then in the comments, they were like, yeah, that would be helpful. Me too. I was like, whoa. So, you know, you just learn stuff as you go. I mean, we're creating in real time. So it's like, you just figure it out as you go. And now I know that people want to put stuff in their calendar so that they get the reminders every time something's going to happen.
That's awesome. So one of the you mentioned earlier about your love of fashion,
mm-hmm.
and that was what you were putting a lot of vocational energy in before the pandemic. And like this is more like something Tripp was thinking of before when stalking you on the internet. Once we connected and things, as someone who mostly gets complaints about my lack of fashion. They were like, how many black t-shirts do you have? And I'm like, well, I got one for all 22 times on my calendar. But but aesthetics is one of those other places that you can, where things get communicated. And I wonder what, like that, I don't know, like that muscle set of thinking about design and creativity and what you communicate in aesthetics. How does that show up in the kind of content you're creating, in such both the kind of like, the TikTok type things, but then also thinking of the different ways you like create space and such, all of it, there's like a lot of similar strengths when it goes to people that are good at design. I mostly just am jealous of people that are good at it. But how do you see like that kind of the eye for design, creativity and such, being an asset, in your work?
I just think it's the creative expression most of all. Like the thing about my fashion eye is just like, I like fashion regardless of what I'm wearing. So if I'm wearing a suit, if I'm wearing sweats and sneakers, like, I don't just throw stuff on. I throw it together. Then I throw it on. But I don't just like go grab stuff randomly, because for me, that's a creative outlet. And it's the same way with the content that I create. So it's funny because, a lot of people are not working in the area that they're educated in. And I thought that would be me coming out of undergrad, because I did a bachelor's in telecommunications with a minor in marketing. And in my telecom program, I really, really took a liking to video production. Like I could sit in the studio all day. And I'm a fat kid. I love to eat. Video production was the only thing I could do and forget to eat. So I would sit in the studio for 8, 9, 10 hours putting together videos and stuff. And then I graduated, and that's not the route that I went in my career. But then when I got on TikTok, all of it came back. So I was actually trained to do what I'm doing on TikTok, like making videos. And that's another creative outlet for me. There are some times where I'm bored and I'll just make a video for fun. But usually the videos I make for fun are like, fashion related type stuff. But I enjoy the work of making faith-based content because it's like, the captions and the transitions and the music and people don't notice it, but when I make short form content, when I take like stuff from our podcast recordings and then make a clip, I'll design it in a way to like create a seamless flow, but I'll be moving stuff all around. Like they said this on the end, but I'm gonna move it to the front because it's more impactful. And in this part right here, I'm gonna put it next to that because it helps the flow of the video more. So like, that's just, I don't know, like I'm trained to do it, but then there's a creative component that you can't train. You just got to have the eye. And I'm grateful that I have that. Like there's some skills you learn and some gifts that you have. And I'm grateful that I have a little bit of both.
Well, I am. I think I really enjoy it. Like, other than that, I just get jealous of your ability to do it well. And I think to myself, well, I'm glad there are many members to this body because when you in things like TikTok or Shorts or the algorithmically presented material, when I mentioned to the Homebrewed community about us doing this, there are quite a few of them that knew you because they're in whatever the deconstruction algorithm pops up, and they're like, "Oh, I love Kristian," and I wonder, being in that space, how you would contrast the like deconstruction space coming out of like white American Christianity and the Black church. You'd mentioned, right, the way sexuality gets played out a little bit different in spaces, and you mentioned like different the kind of spiritual traditions that you're inherited and the way that the church centers different parts. But like because the algorithm will keep putting videos they think, oh, people are mutually showing attention to, are there do you have like observations from seeing how the algorithm shows X, Y, and Z in different places and spaces that help you get a better view than just an individual on the receiving side of the kind of parallel and different journeys of deconstruction going on?
Yeah, the internet, or should I say social media, is drastically different on the creator side of things. I'm still relatively new to being a content creator. It's only been a year and a half. Or I should say professionally. I used to have a vlog that I would do on Facebook Live early on in my like deconstruction process, where I would just get on and call it Kristian Conversations and would just talk to people about questions that I'm throwing around and share ideas. And I did that every week, but I wasn't doing that professionally. It was just something I did as an outlet. But when I got on TikTok, it was a professional decision. It was, I need to find my people because I know we're doing good work, because when we encounter people, they're like, oh my God, I'm so grateful for this. But it's like, I'm getting more pushback than I am acceptance when I put the content out there. So I got on TikTok and started finding my people. And what I've discovered from the creator side, as someone who focuses heavily on the Black church experience, I get a lot of feedback from my white audience when I do politically informed content. So I have a video right now that's still circulating that I posted the day of the Super Bowl about the He Gets Us campaign. And if you encounter that video first, you would think the majority of my audience is white, because every day I get comments from white people on that video, and most of it is positive. But like, that's the type of content that my white audience leans toward. But like, if I put a video of me preaching, that's mostly Black folk. And then when I talk about different expressions within Black faith, it's mostly Black folk. But when I put political content, oh, it lands in some of those like white algorithms, because, you know, the internet is segregated just like the physical spaces that we operate in. So white people don't see some of my content because the algorithm's not going to put it in front of them, because the internet is like really segregated. So that's something that I've seen as well, and being a creator.
Yeah. So how are you feeling right now going into election year? And
Terrible.
and thinking, like you shared earlier, that this is a that the whole Trump broadly experience is in retrospect going to be, you think, play a bigger role in the shaping the church than we may even be aware of now. Knowing what's on the horizon, what are you hoping to do or contribute, or are there observations that you think might be going down that you hope don't, or what goes through Kristian's head when he starts thinking about the next year?
Concern. I am concerned because this political cycle is showing me that we need to deconstruct our politics as much as we need to deconstruct our religion. And binary thinking is causing a great amount of distortion within our religion and our politics, because this two-party system has convinced us that if you're not for one, you must be for the other. So when I make critiques of the Biden administration, of course, I get people saying, oh, so what? You're for Trump? You're going to vote for Trump? I was like, what? And then I make critiques of Trump. And then you get other people saying, oh, so you just worship the Democratic Party. They've never done anything for Black people. And I was like, I didn't say that. I'm making critiques of the people in office and the people who are running for office. And so many people hear a critique of one and think that means you support the other. And it's really, really concerning. And particularly in the Black community, I was just having this conversation with my mom before you and I went live, because my mom is a baby boomer. I'm an elder millennial. And I'm kind of stuck in between boomers and Gen X, and then younger millennials and Gen Z. So boomers still think I'm a kid. Gen Z calls me Unc, so I'm in this weird space. And there are a couple of things I'm observing, particularly within the Black community politically. Boomers have an innate trust for the system, and Gen Z doesn't trust the system worth shit. And then boomers value political parties, and Gen Z values principles. So we're missing each other in our conversations. And then boomers don't listen very well. Boomers
Really?
want you to listen. Boomers want you to listen. Listen, I've been around here longer than you. I was a part of the civil rights movement. I marched with King. You need to listen to me. And I'm like, yeah, but that world doesn't exist anymore. Like you can't apply the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s to what's going on in the 21st century. So, political activism is a young person's game. When you consider the political activists of the civil rights movement, the vast majority of them were under 40. King was 35 at the time of the Civil Rights Act. John Lewis was 24. Angela Davis, I believe she was 20. Fred Hampton was 16. When Fred Hampton was assassinated by Chicago PD and the FBI, he was 22 years old. He had already done so much work by the age of 22. But we have this generational divide that is really, really causing me great concern right now, because we're not listening to each other at all. And there's like this fear of Trump that causes baby boomer Black folk and Gen X Black folk, and even some elder millennials like myself, to take this stance of, vote for Biden because he's not Trump. And I'm like, that is a terrible campaign slogan. That's a terrible, terrible campaign slogan. Like, what do you mean? Like, so we're not going to make any realistic critique of the Biden administration just because we scared of Trump? Like, how are we ever going to get free doing that? So yeah, I'm concerned as hell, right? What about you? How do you feel going into this cycle?
I mean, I think that generational thing exists in kind of liberal white church spaces as well. One of the things that I do with the homebrewed community members is once a month, Diana Butler Bass and I do a live stream that's, for the members called Ruining Dinner, where we talk about religion, politics, things that are in there. And I mean, this tension comes up in there because it's like my community and then Diana's, the cottage community on Substack. So you'll get all the homebrewed people, which will skew around my age and younger, and then hers that are like the baby boomers and such. And that institutional, I guess at some point I remember saying, like, just think, I was in college and I'm an older millennial at 9/11. What has worked well since then?
Nothing.
No, church institutions, political institutions, economic institutions, all. If you're my age or younger, then you don't even have a memory where you were like, well, that worked well. Look at competency, and so the kind of know your role, youngster, and get in line thing. Like, even if you're sitting there going like, nah, I ain't voting for Trump. And look, if I'm in a swing state, I get it, but come on, this is the great democratic experiment where it seems like the only constituencies happy are the military-industrial complex and the shared investments of the 1% in both parties. Like, they get all the attention, and everyone else is fighting over scraps, and then it builds resentment and animosity in the working class who have different political allegiances. It's like we all recognize the system doesn't care about our lives. And so the only thing we can get, where both parties agree, is like who's going to perform our resentment loudest culturally, because politics is just turned into a culture war as opposed to like how we, as a hugely diverse country, figure out how to lead to flourishing for people all over it. And I think that when you don't have experiences where you've seen it work well, and you just see failure after failure, disappointment after disappointment, one more round of, let's save the ship. At some point, you're like, are we sure?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I want to see what happens if there ain't a ship. That is scary, but also, have we considered we might need a different way of organizing who's driving this thing? And get in line energy is not inspiring
at all.
And I feel like there's this the amount of BS the younger generations are being asked to swallow and pretend it has to be this way is as offensive as what we're supposed to be protecting ourselves from. And I don't know what to do with it. And it's one thing if you have something to protect, those who manage to get some house and aren't renting, or to have some job that has benefits, or if you've figured out how to manage student loans and still get to have a family, even the things that in previous generations made you more committed to the system that we've inherited, because you at least have a little skin in the game. Think of how many in our generation and younger just assume the American dream is smaller than the parents had and smaller, than the generation before, and using elder religious status to tell us what to do just isn't going to help anything
at all.
It has me depressed, and I just, but see, I feel like you and I could have said the same story about the same generation in the congregations we grew up in, right? Where you're like, well, it seems to me that the entire budget of this church, as we're thinking that we just want to keep things around so the people that know they're going to have a funeral in the next 15 years get a funeral with the same organ and carpet and pews. And we're not thinking about whether we want our grandkids to know that the God of love revealed in Jesus knows their name, knows their face, and cares about all of them. And that kind of institutional narcissism in the church, you see it in politics, you see it in economics, and whatever that is, is more off-putting to me than so many other things. Even if, I go, yeah, for a harm reduction strategy, I can see Joe Biden, but I ain't knocking on doors. I don't know who I'm calling.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to
I just enjoy
people.
responding to all of his emails and with some suggestions. And I don't know if you get these ones. I get these text messages. It's always some like liberal white billionaire telling me they're going to match my funds. And I'm like, well, I had another idea. You could pay the same tax percentage I just did. That would be a good one. And then instead of spending it on wars, have you considered, I don't know, a more equitable education system in America? Or like, you start. I haven't gotten any response from my free advice.
Go figure. Go figure. I'm surprised they didn't call you and bring you in for a meeting so you can share your ideas. Nah, like the whole system is corrupt as far as I'm concerned. And like I said, I'm stuck in between, right? So I was raised by people who trusted the system. But I was raised for a world that no longer exists. And the people that raised me, the people that raised me are so detached from Gen Z that they have no idea what it looks like to live in a post 9/11 world, like where you don't know a world before 9/11. Like that's a different kind of world to live in. To live in a world where when you first engage the political process in any meaningful way, Barack Obama was the president. Like there are people who never imagined a black president. And now we have a generation of adults where Barack Obama is the first president they remember. Like these are different worlds that we're dealing with. And you got people who, in the older generations who've been around for a while, and the older you get, the more you value comfort, which is a problem because younger generations want change. So you got an older generation who wants comfort arguing with a younger generation who wants change, and they don't understand why they want change. But it's like, look, over half of the country doesn't make a living wage, doesn't have $500 saved up in the savings account. But I just went to the emergency room yesterday and was there for about 4 hours, and my bill was $3,200. Like, how are we supposed to manage? Why is it we don't pay people enough to save up an emergency fund, and we send billions of dollars overseas for war, and then we charge people that we don't pay enough to live? We charge them $3,000 to go to the emergency room, which is healthcare. It's a basic necessity. It's a basic human necessity. Like, it's corrupt.
Yeah.
And at some point, we need to collectively acknowledge that it's corrupt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had a conversation this past week. One of the events I spoke at was a preaching conference, and which the preachers that can afford to go to a preaching conference tend to skew older.
Yeah.
And sometimes I just think if you're 75 or older and you have a very cush job with benefits, you might just want to retire so other people can have one since you had it for a while. But we were talking about this, and I said, no, I said, I think a lot of Americans, the younger you are, the more you feel like the beginning of Kings, where half of the leaders in Israel were like, look at Solomon's rocking this junk. And the other half are the ones that had debt, got turned into debt slaves, and are looking around going like, why are we building weapons and selling it to our enemies? And what happens when the prophet points it out? The king's like, well, we need to get a new prophet.
Exactly.
And all those structural elements are there. And that's like when you get, that's the fruit of idolatry in Israel. And you see the downturn, the splitting of the kingdoms, all that stuff starts coming. And I'm just looking here going, like there's a reason the notion of judgment happens when leaders and institutions stop paying attention to those on the underside.
Absolutely.
Because that energy And that angst and that harm and that frustration, when you call it a democracy, but the people don't feel like they have agency, then then eventually you like the ruse is up, and it can get ugly. And like if someone's expressing that, even if you don't even think, you think, oh, look at Tripp and Kristian, they're just getting all worked up. These elder millennials don't know shit, probably exaggerating things, blah, 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 blah. Maybe he shouldn't have had some avocado toast. Then he could have got his ride to the hospital and kept breathing. Like they say this kind of stuff. You just think for yourself, and you're like, maybe we're completely delusional. But if you don't want it to get ugly, you might want to do something.
Listen. Just start with listening.
Listening. What's that?
Exactly. Exactly.
Listening for 30 seconds before you get a 40-minute monologue about how it was and what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, ever since I call them my alt blonde hairs. They're not gray because I'm not 50 yet, but I figure if I get a few more, then maybe I won't get daddy talked down to. Where they look at you like they're your voluntary parent offering unsolicited life advice about the future of humanity, and you're like, I don't know. Kristian just got a $3,000 bill so he could breathe. Right. Is that where's that on the agenda? My bad. Let's figure it out. Let's use a government shutdown so we can fund some more wars, and have a bipartisan foreign policy consensus so that more young kids might get called up and go into another one of these fat boomer wars. But anyway, it's a little. You can see it's a little touchy subject for me here, Kristian. Yeah.
It's a touchy subject for both of us. I think it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, and political conversations are touchy in general, and then they're taboo for a lot of people as well. So you're like, you're not supposed to say that. And you're like, because again, that's another thing. The older generation came up in the age of respectability politics. And I understand why, because you needed respectability politics at a certain point in our history as Black people in this country for the sake of your safety. Because if you looked a white person in the eye, you might get shot. And they had immunity. White people could kill Black people whenever they got ready. And now the cops can get away with it a whole lot more easier than just like regular civilians. But respectability politics was necessary for our survival at a certain point in this country. Now you got younger generations who don't do respectability. Like you got younger generations who are like, you can kiss my ass with that respectability. I'm gonna say what I gotta say because my life isn't in imminent danger in that way. But there are things that are still stacked up against me that need to be addressed. And the older generation is like, well, that wasn't respectable. I'm not trying to be respectable. That's not my goal. And it's just, why did you ask this question, Tripp? Why?
I don't know. I thought I just had one little quick last question and then the floodgates open.
Yes.
The funny thing to me, right, is like, if you read the New Testament, Jesus promises to be in a few places. And I don't think any of them said, you'll find me playing golf with Pharaoh. Mm-mm. And I think for a lot of Christians that are attached to the system think if we have the right preacher golfing with the president, then, the world's going to work out better. Instead, he's like, whatever you do the least of these, whenever two or three are gathered and being honest and vulnerable, whatever you've done, there's so many places that Jesus promises to be, and none of them are driving the political machine. And if you're a people of the cross builder or people of a cross building nation, then it's really hard to serve a cross bearing God. And you would think the incarnation is God's deep solidarity with those that bear crosses, real and metaphorical, and so it should be a call to allegiance as the people of God. But like the way in which the imagination of the church has internalized Christian and American supremacy is just it's getting more blatantly idolatrous to more and more people. Mm-hmm. But if you don't see it, then you say, oh, I want respectable politics, and you're like, no, well, what about witness politics?
Yeah.
And I think our politics has to actually witness to the pain and suffering and injustice that's here. And if you can't even acknowledge it to my face, why would I think you're going to do something about it when I'm being represented?
Yeah. It's a comedy of errors. It's anarchy. It's unjust. It's corrupt. It's complex.
Mm-hmm.
It's nuanced.
Yeah.
And we really, really don't appreciate nuance. We really don't appreciate it because one of the key tenets of white supremacy is binary thinking, and not just white supremacy culture in general.
Yeah.
Like in our context, our supremacy culture is rooted in whiteness, but you get supremacy culture all over the world. And binary thinking causes us to think everything has to be split in two. So either you're this or you're this, either you're in or you're out, either you're hot or you're cold, because, God don't want no lukewarm saints, right? Either you're Democrat or you're Republican, either you're a Christian or you're a sinner, right? It's like, there's so much more to the world than these two options that are always given. Either you're gay or you're straight. So, bisexual people catch all types of hell. Either you're male or you're female. So it's like intersex people don't even exist. Either you're man or a woman. So there's no room for non-binary people. So we're trying to nuance the world a little bit, and binary thinking has us in a chokehold. And I just really want us to be free.
Yeah. Well, Kristian, this has been a lot of fun. The last bit, maybe it was more like solidarity and venting, but I've really enjoyed it. And everyone, whether you're, watching live or listening or watching later, you can definitely head over to the holysmokesmovement.com, check out the podcast, connect to the larger community. And hopefully when Satan has released your allergies and you're breathing fine, then we can go again. That way you don't just have to sit there staring at your cigar.
Right.
But this has been so much fun. I really appreciate you reaching out and all this working out. It's quite awesome.
And I appreciate you for responding and being so gracious and sharing this time with me. Oh
yeah. Well, everyone that's been on here, thank you for joining. Special thanks to everyone part of the Holy Smokes Movement group for being on here as well. And your people chat more. See, y'all actually get on it. So, it's impressive.
We talk. We have a good time.
Well, you don't even know if you're doing a good job preaching at a white church. You don't even get feedback till Tuesday morning when you check your email.
Exactly. Black church is very dialogical. It's like we talking back to each other. So it just carries over into the digital space. Like, y'all talk back to me now.
Yes. Awesome.
Yeah. All right, man.